All right, how's it going, y'all? So this is a video I've been wanting to make for a while. It's just I've not been able to find time. I've been very slammed with a bunch of stuff. But Synology is finally unveiled, and actually way sooner than I thought they would, the DSM 7.1 beta. So DSM 7.1 is an update that is really going to be focused way more on enterprise clients than regular users. There are a few features that regular users are really going to like, such as SMB multi-channel, as well as having the ability to index the entire home folder for drive packages, which means you'll finally be able to sync photos to a laptop or anything like that, which I'm very excited about. But other than that, DSM 7.1 is really focused so much more on enterprise users. And the DSM 7.1 beta honestly came out way sooner than I thought it would. DSM 7 has really just come out, and they've already got the 7.1 beta on here. And so in this video, we're going to talk about the release notes, and we're also going to go ahead and install it on my old test bench, my 718 Plus. And this is an update I'm very excited about, though it doesn't necessarily have everything we're looking for. I don't know if it's got the version of Samba, which is 4.15, which is required to safely do SMB multi-channel. So I'm going to be investigating a few things like that, and just kind of checking out. All right, so to run the DSM 7.1 beta, it's actually really not that bad. You actually just go to Synology's front page, and it is right there. So you just click on Learn More, and there, it's right there. And you can go ahead and scroll through. You can see that most of the things it's talking about here are really not any of the features that I think a lot of home users are going to care about. I've not seen anything about SMB multi-channel on here, though I'm going to go ahead and install it and see if it's in there. But you can see that most of what's in here is really focused on enterprise. We've got better backups, so actually having bare metal backup of a DSM Synology NAS is now supported in active backup for business, which is huge. There is the update to SSD caching. They've not changed the algorithm, though they now allow you to actually go through and have one SSD cache work for multiple volumes, which is really a feature that enterprise users are going to get a lot out of. It's been more optimized for large VMs and things like that. Really not something that a lot of home users are going to be running into. And they've really done a lot to Synology Active Insight. And so they've got a bunch of stuff here, but really, as you can see, it's almost all about enterprise builds. And so we're going to go ahead and go down to the bottom here, and we're going to go ahead and actually install this thing. And so you can see there's also 3 beta programs available here. Active Backup for Business, which does not yet have the macOS client, though it does now have the ability to back up a Synology NAS. The Mail Plus server, which I've never really set up for clients because mail's a tricky thing to do. And there's the new Synology Drive, which allows you to index all folders in a user's home folder rather than just the drive folder, which will be very nice. Because of the way that Photos requires you to put it in the photo folder within a user's home folder, it'll be nice to be able to sync that to a desktop, which is something that I've been limited on when I've been setting up builds for clients. And then they've also gone through and added even more stuff into Active Insight. But if we go down here, we can go ahead and download it. And we'll just put in our model. And here is where it's super valuable, is the release notes. So the release notes are actually pretty important here because it's going through and, well, it's saying, yes, this is beta software, evaluation purpose, yada, yada, yada. If you're a business or honestly even a home user, do not upgrade to it. Home users, I mean, if there's a feature in here you really want, you can upgrade. Synology very rarely releases buggy builds, but it's still risky. I mean, a NAS is such a crucial part of a business. I tend to just tell people, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, unless there's a security vulnerability, because it can be so important for an entire business's workflow. The first 2 things are just some warnings here. Hey, it's a beta. And 2, after you update, you're not going to be able to downgrade. There are ways to downgrade, but they're pretty janky. And so I would really not plan on doing it. And that's one unfortunate thing is, at least with a 7 beta, when you upgraded, you actually upgraded the entire NAS. Not just the actual disks in your hard drives, you actually upgraded the NAS. So if you went through and formatted the drives and stuck them in there, it would by default install Synology 7. You would have to go through, enable Telnet, then you would SSH in and force it, but it was a very difficult process to downgrade and most people would not be able to. And the other thing is that's actually pretty important is DSM 7.1 is going to be the last upgrade for actually a lot of NASs. It looks like it's mostly it's actually even up to the 15 series, which are only about 7 years old now. So that is a while, but they seem to have cut off everything before the 15 and even the DS216 SE. So this is before I got into NAS's, so I don't know these models nearly as well. But yeah, there's even a 2016 version that is actually going to have its last update. Now that being said, and if they continue this on, Synology has been doing a great job of releasing security updates for both 7 and 6, which is huge. They are still supporting the actual devices from a security perspective, so they're still totally fine to be deploying, even if they're all in the older versions. And I've kept a fair amount of clients on older versions who just have underpowered CPUs, and especially units with not a ton of RAM. It's just not worth that risk of upgrading, and then all of a sudden their workflow just kind of breaks because they now do not have as much power as they did before. But they've been releasing the security updates, so because of that, it's totally fine to stay on those older versions. And then there's just some changeover things here. So they've changed the way the LED indicators works, not much. They are going through and removing Windows 2000 domains. There's a lot of issues in those old versions of domains and SMB that they were just locking down. Then number 7 is actually a pretty important one because there is a weird thing where sometimes if you don't have a great time server between your domain controller and your NAS, I've actually had an issue with clients before, basically they're out of sync slightly. So when the NAS sends over the user's credentials trying to log into a server, it's timestamped wrong because it's got a different clock than the actual domain controller, and so it'll fail. And so one way around this is basically every single time a user tries to log in, have your Synology go through, talk to the domain controller, which you should set up your NTP server as your domain controller to make sure they're on the exact same time. So it does a quick time sync and then lets the user in. And so that way, even if there is a drift, it'll be cleaned up very, very quickly before that token is sent over. And they're going through and just moving this from the LDAP section to the time setting. So that's not going to be necessary for 90% of users, but those people who have had that glitch, this is very important to know where to move it now, especially if you're going through and reading old forum posts, you're like, where is this? Then another really important one here is, and this actually might make it so that people don't upgrade to DSM 7.1. So the Synology storage replication, basically snapshot replication, is now only going to be able to work with NASs that are actually on DSM 7. So if you have a NAS on DSM 6, you can't use that as a target if you upgrade to DSM 7.1. So that's actually going to be pretty worrisome in a few use cases, just because it's nice to have your old NAS as a backup target where you can keep running on everything. I don't think I have any clients on that right now, but that is something that I've always kind of left as a flexibility. But that is one thing that is pretty important to know. Upgrading to this could mess up your backup settings and force you to upgrade your old NAS to DSM 7, which you might not want to do. Then there's just the upgrade to the DSM 7.1 Beta Virtual Machine Manager, nothing too much there. Then we've got some new features that are very excited about here. So there's one, this is just going to be super useful, the ability to have an SSD cache actually applied to multiple volumes. I always thought this was kind of a dumb limitation. It really messes up a lot of flexibility you might want to have. Is previously you had to have an SSD cache for every single volume if you wanted SSD caching. So if you split your NAS into 2 different volumes, because you had a huge deployment, you would have to actually have 2 separate SSD caches. Now you can go ahead and add in an SSD cache to up to 8 volumes at the same time. And so that's just going to make quality of life stuff a lot easier for people who have multiple volumes. I've seen deployments where it is necessary. A lot of times multiple volumes is actually an overhead that's unnecessary, but sometimes it's very useful. And this will also give better flexibility for saying, okay, I want the SSD cache applied to this volume, but not this volume. So it's just things like that that can make this very useful. Then Storage Manager is now actually going through and working better with high availability mode. Then there's also the ability to run the FS disk check. And so if you have a single volume, previously, if you had to do a fdisk check, it would actually take your entire NAS offline, even if just one volume had an issue. Now it's gone through and updating to where you can run that check with a single volume and have the rest of the NAS still running. Once again, a feature for people with multiple volumes, really in enterprise settings. Allowing you to say, I don't want notifications until it's 3%. Really 10% is the line you should be drawing. You do not want to go above 10% because you can get very bad performance. They're now going through and actually supporting OpenID, which is pretty cool. And then what else is there? Not too much here. Yeah, then that's pretty much all of the important stuff. So now let's just go ahead and let's install on this thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and install on this. What you should always do, especially before installing a beta, is make sure you are on the most recent update, which I've already done here. So on this unit, I just went through a minute ago and updated it to the most recent version of DSM, and that is definitely what you want to do. So yeah, I ripped out a hard drive from this. I apologize, NAS, but yeah. So it's running one fewer hard drive, but it's fine. It's just a test bench. So now I've gone through, before this video started, I already went through and upgraded to the very most recent version of DSM. So you can see I am on 7.01 42218 update 3. So I just went through and added that in. And now we can go ahead and if we go up here, we've already downloaded the DSM 7.1 beta and we're going to apply it manually. Once again, make sure you're using the correct version for 1. And 2, make sure that you know what you're doing and that you're not going to be in trouble and want to downgrade, because Synology does not support downgrading like other operating systems do. It's going to be very, very, very difficult to downgrade. And so I really would not recommend putting this on production, even though Synology is normally very, very, very good about putting out pretty stable builds. You never know what will happen. So now it's going to go through and update everything. And now who knows how long it's going to take. The first update took about, what, 15 minutes? So now we're just going to sit here and wait. All right, so I did something dumb here. This beep's going to drive you crazy. It's going to drive me crazy. So the beep is because I took out one of the drives to use it for something else because it's just a test bench. And so every time it wakes up, it goes, oh, I'm missing a volume, and starts beeping. And normally that's okay because you can just go through and turn it off in DSM. However, it's updating. And so now it's just beeping incessantly. And you can't turn it off in DSM because DSM's not up. So I'm just gonna leave this running and speed it through. And I'm gonna leave this room because it's gonna just drive me slightly insane. Okay, so I can finally log into DSM. So let's first turn off that. Okay, much better now. One good thing, if you ever run into this, DSM automatically opens up a control panel when you log in the first time and it's beeping. And so you just go in here and you say beep off. So now I'm gonna go through and just turn off beeps because I just don't need that right now. Because, well, it's fine if this thing kills itself. Not that big of a deal for me. Okay, so now we are in, and so let's check out the new DSM 7.1 beta and see if we can spot any differences whatsoever, because there's not gonna be a ton. Okay, so first off, snapshot replication appears to be broken. We probably have to go through and fix it. And so it appears to have not been updated from the actual update. So we just need to go ahead and hit repair. Interesting. Normally they will go through and automatically upgrade these things for you, but here it would appear as though it's actually going through and failed to update itself. And so instead it's now just broken since DSM 7.1 appears to have a very significant difference to 7.0 and 6.2 in terms of snapshot replication. But a quick repair and it appears to be going well. Yep, everything appears to have just carried over. All of my random stuff is there. Looks all good. One of the things we can see is into the beta packages, we can go ahead and install Active Backup for Business Agent for Synology DSM. And so this is the one where we're going to be able to actually do a full bare metal restore of our Synology NAS from another active backup for business client. So that means that you don't have to worry about every single setting getting backed up or anything like that. It is a full-blown backup that you could just reapply to a device and just format it to exactly how it was in the past. It's not going to be as space efficient as something like Hyper Backup or anything like that, because those tend to be very intelligent with the file services and everything like that. But it is going to give you that full bare metal restore, which for large companies is just crucial. Space is cheap, manpower is expensive, salaries are incredibly expensive to large companies. And so having people down is so much more. So we can just go ahead and open her up and just hit start. Not sure if they've not gone through and done it. I have no idea what I'm applying. I don't think I can scale this window. It may be borked. Start. All right, well, appears to be borked possibly. No idea why. It just does not appear to be working. We can also go ahead and open up Active Backup for Business. All right, and so now we can see that the Synology NAS is an option, though it does not look like, at least on this machine, I'm going to be able to run it because you can see all the stuff that I'm trying to use to make it work is borked. But it looks like you're just able to go through and add a device just like you would with everything else, but it'll just have that full-blown bare metal restore, which is just so great about Active Backup for Business. Though we currently, unfortunately, do not yet have the Active Backup for Business for macOS client, which I'm super excited about. But now let's go ahead and check out SMB, because one of the big updates to DSM 7.1 is the fact that they are including SMB 4.15. 4.15 is a big deal because that's the first version of SMB, or Samba in the case of Linux, that supports SMB multi-channel. Previously, it supported it. It was just in a test case where there was a couple of times where if you had a high latency connection and you were using SMB multi-channel and one of the channels failed while it was transmitting data, you would have silent data corruption because the packets would come out of the order and it wouldn't detect it. I'm no expert on it, but because of that, they left it in a do not use state just for testing. But with 4.15, they've officially released it full. And so that means that once Synology is updated to that, we'll be able to natively add in SMB multi-channel, which is going to be a huge deal for a ton of users. And the reason it's going to be such a huge deal is the fact that that means you'll be able to have 2 or even 4 connections from your NAS and be able to use those 1 gigabit connections and actually get faster speeds. So I'm planning on doing a video on how you can get a 10 gig switch with a 10 gig adapter to your laptop and then use 2 or 4 cables into your Synology without a 10 gig connection and actually be able to essentially bond those together to get faster single client performance. So with 4 gigabit cables, in theory, you could get up to 400 megabytes per second read and write over those 4 cables. And so I'm going to be doing some videos on that. But unfortunately, it appears as though if we go into the Samba settings down here, so SMB service, it says that SMB is running 4.10.18, which means that it is not 4.15, which is needed to run SMB multi-channel. We can go through and check in control panel and see if there's anything different. But I had a feeling about this due to the fact that Synology did not mention it in its update notes. However, they do now have the aggregation portal as a part of this. I'm not sure if this is actually part of 7.1 beta or 7.01, that most recent update, but this is used for SMB DFS. So that's distributed file system support, where effectively you can have multiple shared folders across multiple NASs, and they're all aggregated into one shared folder on one NAS. And so that way users don't have to go through and figure out why there's 17 shared folders because they've got all these different NASs. Instead, they just go through, they've got one pane of glass where they can connect to everything, and it's so much easier. So you can go ahead and enable that here. Though this is very much going to be, once again, an enterprise feature for enterprise users who actually have that kind of a setup. It's probably not going to be that helpful for most regular home users who just have one NAS, but it's great that they've added it in here. And so you can see that you go through and you actually have to have an LDAP account. That way the permissions are all synced. And so there's all of that. But it's great they've got that. I'll probably be doing a video on that. I just don't have enough stuff for it right now. And let's just go ahead and double check advanced settings. And it looks like everything is the same. Except they have added in what appears to be 2 new options. monitoring changes on all subfolders within the directory, and synchronize data to drive immediately upon SMB client request. So I assume that that's actually going through, and this right here, synchronized data, that's going to be sync requests. And so sync requests are very, very, very slow because the SMB client, your laptop goes, all right, I'm not gonna send any more data until that data is written to the disk. Now, that's well and dandy for making sure the data is secure and securely written to the disk before moving on, just in case of an unexpected power outage or crash. But if you have that on, that can be incredibly slow. Now, SMB very rarely actually sends these requests. NFS sends them all the time and it's very slow. So I'm interested to see what performance this would have. But for use cases where you might have this, which I really don't know, it could be very useful for, once again, for enterprises though. For regular users, I would not recommend enabling this because there's going to be very few things where if your NAS crashed and you lost the last 2 seconds of data, you would not be in that trouble for most users. You need a good backup for that stuff anyway. And this is unlikely to help because it's a very short amount of time where the data could possibly be inconsistent. And things like snapshots can really help that. If there's any kind of corruption, you can just roll back to a snapshot. But it's good that they add this in here, once again, very much an enterprise setting. But unfortunately, there is not the SMB multi-channel just yet. All right, well, that's gonna be it for this. As you can see, it's actually a bit more buggy than I thought it would be. From my very first impressions, do not take this to mean anything. I would not recommend people update to this unless they really need it. Wait for it to come out fully, wait for all the features to come out, because at least as of right now, there's clearly some stuff that's not done. And they say that it is a beta for a reason. This is for people who want to go through and test out the most advanced stuff. And so right now, there's just some issues with it. And so I would really recommend going through and waiting until the full things come out, unless you really have a specific feature you need in this, but I don't imagine a ton of users do. All right, well, that's gonna be it for this overview. Go and leave any other tutorials you'd like to see me make in the comments below, and have a good one. Bye.